After 7 years of marriage to Lysander Blackthorn, he has cared for 29 canaries. Now, a 30th, a young woman, lay diagonally on our large bed, wrapped in a towel. I turned my gaze to him. Playing outside wasn't enough. Did he have to bring them home, too? The girl deliberately let her towel slip. "Aaliyah," Lysander said, "you're like a dead fish in bed. Let me show you how to satisfy a man." That night, I was forced to watch a dramatic scene. The next morning, Lysander was furious at my lack of reaction. He seemed to forget that our marriage was only a contract, and just a week remained until it ended. "Aaliyah, go get a dress for Isolde," he instructed, sitting half-dressed on the bed while lighting a cigarette. Clothes lay scattered on the floor, a silent testament to the previous night's events. I stood motionless, glancing at him. Isolde, wrapped in a blanket, smiled brightly. "Lysander, this isn't right. Consider the Blackthorn family," she said. Her tone lacked remorse, instead showing pride and challenge. As she shifted, the blanket slipped slightly, exposing skin marked with red welts. Besides, the Blackthorn family probably doesn't have clothes in my size. I remained expressionless and turned to leave. "Aaliyah, I'm speaking to you," his voice followed, sharp with irritation. I paused but didn't turn back. "I have things to do. If you need a dress, get it yourself." For 7 years, I had rarely defied him, whether his requests were direct or implied. Today was the first time I broke that silent agreement. "What did you say?" Lysander's tone hardened. He wasn't used to my coldness. "Do you have anything better to do? You stay home all day, earning nothing. Don't forget, Alea. Without me, you wouldn't have this life." He wasn't wrong. Without our marriage, I wouldn't live in such wealth. But he forgot that this wasn't the life I wanted. Fresh from college, Evangeline Hartwood, who raised me, told me the orphanage faced demolition unless someone funded it. Then Lysander Blackthorn appeared. He offered to sponsor the orphanage if I married him. I hesitated. His world was so different from mine. Sensing my reluctance, he made the offer impossible to refuse. A 7-year term, after which I could leave freely. I expected nothing more from the marriage, and indeed, I soon realized he chose me only because I resembled his ideal woman. At that moment, a young girl stepped out of the fitting room in a white dress, her long, sleek hair cascading. I was stunned. She looked exactly like her. She had clearly overheard and came prepared. Lysander's gaze lingered, and for once, he wasn't cold. He spoke more seriously than usual. "You look beautiful. Keep dressing like this." Isolde's smile widened. "Really? Then you'll need to take me shopping for more dresses like this," she said playfully. Lysander nodded. "I will." She laughed proudly and glanced at me with a mocking gleam. "Aaliyah, you should join us." I knew she wanted to humiliate me. "No, I have other things to do." Lysander frowned. "You're coming too." I didn't argue. Defiance wasn't wise now. In 7 days, it would all be over. Lysander reserved an upscale boutique for the 3 of us. Standing by Isolde, he spoke to her in a gentle tone I had never heard before. "This one is lovely. Try it on." Isolde giggled, taking the dress. "How did you know I need a size 36E?" she teased, shooting me a meaningful look. The assistant smiled. "Mrs. Blackthorn is lucky to have such a thoughtful husband." Lysander didn't correct her. Isolde's smile deepened, feigning modesty. "Oh, it's not that rare," she said. Then the assistant turned to me. "Miss, who are you?" Lysander seemed to recall my presence. "Aaliyah, pick a few dresses as well." Before I could reply, the assistant gushed. "Your husband is so generous, treating even the staff kindly." The store fell silent. I remained unfazed, replying to emails on my phone. From the start, Lysander forbade me from working, saying the role of Mrs. Blackthorn required privacy. But I stayed independent, anonymously posting code on GitHub. I did well enough for foreign companies to reach out. But because of our agreement, I never accepted, choosing to wait. Now, the wait was almost over. As Lysander approached, I quickly turned off my phone. "I'll take this one," I said, pointing to a plain dress. "I'll try that one too," Isolde added, snatching the dress and walking toward my fitting room. I frowned. "Use another one." Oh, it's just a dress. She shoved me hard into the fitting room. I stumbled, my arm striking the mirror. The glass cracked, shards scattering. Lysander, hearing the crash, rushed in. Isolde sat on the floor, clutching her hand, tears streaming. If you didn't want me to wear it, you could have just said so. Why push me? She whimpered, showing a small scratch. Lysander's face darkened. He knelt, holding her hand with concern. Why are you so hurt? Does it hurt much? He turned to me, eyes blazing. Aaliyah, are you really so petty over a dress? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, he cut me off as though I wasn't even there, sitting amid the shattered glass, my arms covered in bleeding cuts. He gently pulled Isolde into his arms, comforting her softly. Don't worry, I'll take you to the hospital. Isolde leaned into his embrace, sobbing helplessly. Will I have scars? How will I face anyone? She whimpered. No, I'll take you to the best doctors immediately. He reassured her, not glancing back at me, leaving me in the wreckage. I bore the pain and went to my usual private hospital. Just as the doctor was about to clean my wounds, Lysander entered and pulled away the anesthetist. Hurry, Isolde is in a lot of pain. Give her anesthesia right now. But this patient, the doctor started to say, but Lysander seemed to finally notice me, frowning as if about to speak. It's fine. Go ahead, I said quietly. The doctor hesitated, then followed him out. I turned to another doctor. Please, just handle the glass shards. The doctor looked concerned. It will be extremely painful without anesthesia. Can you handle it? No problem, go ahead. Through the entire procedure, I clenched my teeth in silence. By the end, the doctor couldn't help but remark, You have incredible endurance. I said nothing. If I couldn't bear it, I would have collapsed years ago. After my wounds were treated, I went home. As I entered, the faint aroma of simmering soup drifted from the kitchen. The maid, hearing me, turned around with a slightly guilty look. Mrs. Blackthorne, Mr. Lysander said to take the soup to Miss Isolde as soon as it's ready. Since she hurt her hand, he asked me to care for her. When she noticed my bandaged arms, she hesitated. Or, maybe you'd like some as well? I smiled faintly, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, thank you. If even a maid cared for me more than my husband of 7 years did, what was left to say? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an official job offer from a foreign company I'd interviewed with online. Without thinking twice, I accepted, set a start date, and booked a flight for a week later. The house was empty, making it easy to leave. Though my arm was still sore, I packed my bags quickly. After I finished, I looked around the room. 7 years here left me with a trace of regret, but mostly relief. I made one last call to Lysander. He answered, his voice filled with irritation. Aaliyah, how dare you call me? If Isolde suffers any lasting effects, you'll pay for it. I opened my mouth, but realized there was nothing left to say. He hung up before I could respond. I stood still for a moment, then let a bitter smile curl at the corner of my lips. Pulling out our marriage contract, I signed the divorce clause and left it on the desk. No note, no explanation. I knew he'd understand. Dragging my suitcase, I left the house and checked into a quiet hotel. During those 7 days, I rested undisturbed. He didn't message or call once. On the 7th day, I sat in the airport lounge, waiting to board. My phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I glanced at it and turned off my phone without hesitation. His name vanished, just like our marriage. I boarded the flight to a new life, not looking back. Outside the airport, a cheerful young man stood with a sign, smiling brightly. Miss Aaliyah, I'm Xavier Montgomery, the company's intern sent to pick you up. He quickly grabbed my suitcase, looking at me curiously. I didn't expect you to be so young. Most tech experts are older. I smiled, but didn't elaborate. His energy and enthusiasm reminded me of myself during college, hopeful and driven. In the parking lot, my phone finally connected to the network and buzzed relentlessly. As I looked down, I saw it was filled with messages from Lysander. Calmly, I deleted everything with one tap. Xavier loaded my luggage into the trunk and smiled. Miss Aaliyah, you have a lot of missed calls. Should I wait while you respond? No, they're not important, I replied nonchalantly. As we drove, he asked, "Is this your first time here? If you want, I can show you around before you start work the day after tomorrow." "Yes, it's my first time," I answered, gazing out at the passing scenery. My phone rang again, the sound grating in the quiet car. Xavier glanced at me kindly. "Maybe you should take it. It could be urgent." I hesitated, then answered. It was Lysander, his voice tense with restrained fury. "Aaliyah, where are you? Why didn't you pick up? What's going on?" His anger, so unwarranted, made me smirk coldly. "Lysander, there's no need for us to stay in touch." He was stunned, then shouted angrily, "No need! You're my wife! Come back now!" I spoke calmly. "The 7 years are up. I'm no longer your wife." Then I hung up and blocked his number. Xavier seemed to sense the tension and smiled reassuringly. "Miss Alia, you're starting a new chapter in a new city. Don't let this ruin your mood. We're almost at your company-arranged place. You're going to love it." I gazed out the window, the clouds on the horizon tinged gold by the setting sun. A weight in my heart finally lifted. I nodded softly. "Yes, I'm ready for a fresh start." Lysander wasn't ready to give up. He called me from multiple numbers. The ringtone kept blaring until I finally answered, my voice icy. "Lysander, what do you want?" There was silence on his end before he whispered, "I didn't agree to the divorce." I let out a cold, emotionless laugh. "You were the one who proposed the agreement. After it ended, we were free to part ways. Now that it's over, I've moved on. Besides, you have Isolde. My leaving changes nothing for you two." He tried to argue, but I ended the call abruptly. Over the next few days, he kept calling and messaging, trying to demand, persuade, or negotiate for my return. Each time, I coldly rejected him. Perhaps he had never been treated this way before. Eventually, the calls and messages stopped, and I could finally settle into my new life. At first, adjusting to a new place and a new job was difficult. But as time passed, I discovered happiness again. Life regained its meaning, and the part of me that had been stifled was finally free. Occasionally, memories of the past surfaced, bringing back those unforgettable moments. Whenever that happened, Xavier would notice right away. He always found excuses to make me laugh or encouraged me to try new things. Gradually, I moved on, no longer bound by the past. One day, Evangeline Hartwood called. Her voice was as gentle as ever. "Aaliyah, how are you doing these days?" "I'm doing well," I answered lightly. She sighed, her tone tinged with curiosity. "Don't lie to me. Something happened, didn't it?" Her words stunned me, and I tightened my grip on the phone. "What do you mean?" I knew about your marriage agreement with Lysander," she said softly. "You didn't tell me at the time, but I could see you weren't happy." My throat felt tight. After a long pause, I finally admitted, "I've left." Silence followed. Then she sighed with relief. "Good. If it weren't for the children at the orphanage, I wouldn't have wished for you to make that sacrifice. Aaliyah, let the past stay behind. Live for yourself now, okay?" My eyes welled up. I nodded gently. After the call, I unlocked my phone. A news alert appeared on the screen, and a familiar name caught my attention. The headline read, "Lysander Blackthorne and Isolde Fairchild spotted together, seemingly in love." I clicked it. The image showed Lysander and Isolde walking through the airport, acting affectionate. Isolde's smile was radiant. The comments section buzzed with reactions. "Lysander swaps women more often than clothes. Isolde's been with him so long, maybe she's the real deal now." Another comment read, "What about the Blackthorne family? Never seen them before. Is he married? Why is there no news about it?" I stared at the screen, a mocking smile on my lips. He had once told me our marriage was just a transaction, nothing elaborate. I'd agreed back then. My only concern was the children at the orphanage. We had simply signed a certificate at the Civil Affairs Office. No celebration. Photos taken by strangers that day were dismissed as a joke since there was no official ceremony. Those hidden chapters of our lives now served as the final goodbye. Closing the news alert, I took a sip of warm coffee. The sunlight streaming through the window cast a gentle warmth over the table, like the prelude to a new chapter. His life no longer mattered to me. But unexpectedly, someone didn't want to let go. The next day, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. There was no message, just a link. After hesitating, I clicked it. It contained various rumors about Lysander and Isolde. The sensational headlines read, Lysander and Isolde's affair nearing confirmation, and Isolde Fairchild, future lady of the Blackthorn family. In interviews, Isolde gave ambiguous answers. When asked if she was dating Lysander, she smiled sweetly and replied, anything is possible. These vague statements only added fuel to the gossip. What surprised me most was Lysander's silence. He didn't refute the rumors, which everyone took as confirmation, and people eagerly supported their supposed romance. After reading, I felt drained. Isolde's intentions were clear. She was solidifying her position while flaunting and taunting me. But I didn't understand why this still involved me after I had already left. I didn't want to get involved, but I wouldn't allow it to disrupt my life. With a frown, I compiled the information and sent it to Lysander's inbox, adding a simple message. Mind your own business. After that, I shut off my computer, determined to let it go. Isolde's schemes and Lysander's choices were no longer my concern. My focus was on my projects and living my life. I refused to waste energy on meaningless drama. With several new projects on my plate, my days were filled. The demanding work kept me too busy to follow what was happening back home. The past and those two people faded from my mind. Then, one day, a friend who knew about my history with Lysander messaged me, your ex-husband is trending online. Have you seen it? I clicked the link and saw an interview video featuring Lysander. When the reporter asked about his relationship with Isolde and whether he planned to marry her, he firmly denied it. There's nothing going on. She and I are merely business associates, not even friends. Then he paused and mentioned me for the first time publicly. Such rumors are harmful to my wife. The comment section erupted. Lysander is married? Seriously? He actually acknowledged his wife. The reactions were shocked and amazed. His words not only dismissed the speculation about Isolde, but also, for the first time, acknowledged my presence. While everyone speculated about who his wife was, I watched calmly, unaffected. Over the years, I had realized it was better to concentrate on my own goals, rather than worry about others' opinions or gossip. I closed the news and refocused on my work. When our project succeeded, the team decided to celebrate. At the lively party, filled with laughter and chatter, I felt exhausted and stepped into the garden for some fresh air. The cool night breeze, mixed with the scent of plants, relaxed me. Just as I closed my eyes to savor the peaceful moment, a familiar voice spoke. Aaliyah! I turned to see Lysander standing under the dim lights, his expression complicated. His voice was low as he began. Aaliyah, I realize now that I was wrong. I was distant and selfish. I finally understand that you are the one I should have valued most. I stared at him coldly, saying nothing. He sighed, appearing lost. I've sorted out everything with Isolde. She's out of the picture now. Please give me a chance to start over. Raising an eyebrow, I asked indifferently, Start over? He nodded eagerly. If you enjoy your current job, you can stay abroad. If you want to return, I can help you launch your own company. Do anything you want. Since we never had a wedding, I'll make up for it with a grand ceremony so everyone knows about you. This time, everything will be on your terms. His words were earnest, but to me, they sounded absurd. Tired of listening, I turned to leave. He grabbed my arm. Aaliyah, hear me out. At that moment, Xavier Montgomery walked by and stepped between us. Sir, this is a private matter. Please don't disturb Miss Elia. Lysander glared at Xavier. Who the hell are you? I'm speaking to my wife. This doesn't concern you. I corrected him icily. Lysander, we're already divorced. He froze, then muttered stubbornly. Regardless, I still hope we can. I couldn't hold back any longer. Lysander, you've always been like this. When we married, you called it a business arrangement, promising we'd separate after 7 years. Now you want to start over? Have you ever respected me? His face showed confusion. He opened his mouth but couldn't respond. I took a deep breath and continued. You say you've changed, but you haven't. Everything you do is still selfish. You say you care, but where was that respect when I needed it? This isn't about love. You're just trying to ease your guilt. He stared at me, shocked, as if seeing me for the first time. I let out a bitter laugh and walked away, leaving him with my final words. I used to compromise and endure, not anymore. After that night, Lysander changed tactics. He began trying to win me back by acting like a suitor. Every day, he sent flowers, handmade chocolates, and gifts related to my interests. It was clear he was trying to re-enter my life. Aaliyah, he said a bit shamelessly. Since we're no longer married, I have the right to pursue you, don't I? I looked at him coldly, refusing to reply. Xavier asked me privately, Aaliyah, are you sure you're okay with this? He's bothering you every day. I smiled calmly. For someone with his wealth and power, if I ignore him, he'll eventually lose interest. He's not patient. Once he gets no reaction, he'll give up. But surprisingly, he persisted. Even when I briefly returned to handle some matters, he arranged for someone to continue sending gifts, along with notes and messages. His determination was exhausting, but I couldn't stop him, so I chose to ignore it. One day, Xavier had to leave work early for a family matter. I told him, Don't worry, head home early. But Miss Elia, who will drive you home? He asked. It's fine. I've lived here long enough to know the way. He hesitated, but left quickly. After work, I walked home alone, the sunset casting a reddish hue over the streets. Suddenly, I heard someone call out, Aaliyah! The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Squinting in the fading sunlight, I turned around. To my surprise, Isolde Fairchild stood before me. She looked nothing like the confident, glamorous woman I remembered. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, and her eyes dark with fatigue. Her wrinkled coat made her appear worn and neglected. She looked at me with a bitter smile. Aaliyah, this is all your fault. Are you satisfied now? Her voice was heavy with exhaustion and resentment. Before I could respond, she continued bitterly. Because of that email you sent, Lysander withdrew all his support and publicly denied me. I've lost everything. Even my family has turned their backs on me. I scowled and cut Isolde off. What does this have to do with me? It's all his doing. Go find him. Her face flushed red, her eyes burning with fury. Aaliyah, stop acting so superior. Are you proud of yourself? He did this because of you, didn't he? I paused, finding her reasoning absurd. Why is it that men's actions are always tied to women? What he does to you has nothing to do with me. I glanced at her worn-out face, my tone softening slightly. Isolde, let me give you some advice. You're still young and capable. Why not start fresh? You graduated from a top university, got a job, and can live independently. Isn't that a good thing? Isolde laughed bitterly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Easy for you to say, Aaliyah. Do you think everything works out perfectly for everyone? Even if I leave him, he still clings to his memories of you. Hearing her irrational words, I realized she was trapped in her own delusions and could not be reasoned with. I sighed calmly. I don't want to hear this anymore. If you have issues, take them up with him. As I turned to go, Isolde grabbed my arm. Her frail appearance contrasted with the surprising strength of her grip, and I couldn't break free. Aaliyah! She hissed, her voice a mix of despair and rage. How dare you wash your hands of this? If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be like this. She pulled a small knife from her pocket, the blade glinting menacingly in the fading sunlight. A chill ran through me, and I stepped back cautiously. If you weren't here, he would have married me, she cried, her eyes wild with madness. He said I reminded him of you. This is all your fault. Her words were incoherent, her mind clearly unraveling. I knew that dealing with someone in this state required calm, not confrontation. Isolde, please calm down, I said softly, trying to sound non-threatening. I know you're upset. Put the knife down and we can talk this through. She sneered, her grip on the knife tightening, her eyes reflecting relentless madness. You think I don't know what you're thinking? Today is your last day alive, she screamed, lunging at me. My heart pounded as I instinctively stepped back, but she cornered me. At that crucial moment, a figure rushed in and shielded me. The knife's momentum sliced into his arm. I heard a muffled groan and looked up to see Lysander. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes remained steady. I was stunned, unable to speak. Blood soaked his shirt from the long gash on his arm. My chest tightened, and I quickly checked the wound. Fortunately, it hadn't hit an artery. I exhaled in relief. His bodyguards arrived and restrained Isolde, the knife clattering to the ground. She screamed and thrashed, spewing incoherent words. The bodyguards called the police, and with Lysander's intervention, Isolde's fate was sealed. At the hospital, the doctor examined Lysander's wound. It required stitches, but he stubbornly refused anesthesia. No anesthesia, just stitch it up, he insisted firmly. The doctor tried to persuade him, but it was useless. A bodyguard turned to me. Aaliyah, he's being stubborn. Maybe you can convince him. I pushed open the door and entered the room. Lysander sat on the bed, his face set with determination. When he saw me, a faint smile appeared. You're here. I looked at him coldly and didn't reply. He tried to lighten the mood. Didn't you say you understood me? You used to refuse anesthesia for stitches. I thought I'd try it too. I sighed. Lysander, I appreciate that you saved me today, but what's the point of this? He paused, the facade slipping. His voice grew hesitant. Aaliyah, I just want you to see that I care. Seeing through his motives, I interrupted coldly. You think enduring pain will impress me? Lysander, I don't need these gestures. He stiffened, trying to defend himself. I know I made mistakes, but I truly want to make things right. Make things right, I scoffed. Do you think this is what I want? You still don't get it. No matter what you do, you can't turn back time. You claim you care, but you never asked me what I wanted. His eyes showed both struggle and defeat, but he refused to give up. I can change. I'm trying. Enough, Lysander. Your efforts are just to ease your guilt. I don't need them. He looked shocked, as if hearing this for the first time. After a pause, he murmured, Aaliyah, I just don't want to lose you. We're finished, Lysander, I said calmly, each word striking like a blow. The past 7 years were a mistake. Let me go, and let yourself go. This time, he didn't argue. The doctor began stitching, and Lysander no longer insisted on refusing anesthesia. He lay quietly, his eyes filled with sadness, finally realizing it was truly over. When the stitches were done, he whispered hoarsely, You're right, Aaliyah. I never really knew what you wanted. I'm sorry. And thank you. He left with dignity, and I was finally free to end this endless struggle and begin my life anew. A year later, I returned home and visited Evangeline Hartwood first. The orphanage was as warm as ever, filled with the laughter of children. Evangeline greeted me with a loving smile. Aaliyah, I'm glad you're back. We sat on wooden chairs in the courtyard, chatting about life. I told her my work abroad was going well, that my team was fantastic, and we'd just finished a major project with more opportunities ahead. She nodded, handing me a cup of hot tea, her eyes shining with satisfaction. I knew you'd keep improving. You've always made me proud, I said, setting my cup down with care. How has the orphanage been doing lately? She smiled warmly, her voice carrying a hint of emotion. Things are going well. Life has gotten a bit easier. Lately, we've been receiving anonymous donations, sometimes food, sometimes books or clothes, even financial help. We don't know who's sending them, but these contributions have really lightened our load. For a moment, I was taken aback, a fleeting thought flashing through my mind. I chose not to pursue it further and simply nodded gently. That's good to hear. After a long conversation, I stood up to leave. Evangeline Hartwood held my hand and advised, Aaliyah, no matter where you go, remember to take care of yourself. I smiled and nodded. Don't worry, Evangeline. As I stepped out of the courtyard, a fine mist began to fall. The path outside was so still, it felt like time had slowed. Just as I was about to get into the car, my eyes caught sight of a familiar figure not far away. He stood beneath a tree, holding an umbrella. His stance was still straight, but the former chill and intensity were gone, replaced by a quiet calmness. He remained there silently, making no move to approach or call out to me, as if he was merely passing by or taking a fleeting look from afar. I paused briefly, stunned for a second, but then turned away and continued walking. Through the mist and growing distance, we neither exchanged words nor made eye contact. He didn't follow, and I didn't stop. Seated in the car, I glanced one last time at his familiar silhouette in the rearview mirror. He remained there, standing still, slowly fading into the mist. Some people are only meant to walk beside you for part of your journey. Our paths had long since reached their end, and being apart now was the best outcome. I turned my head, rolled up the window, and faced forward, feeling a deep sense of calm in my heart. The mist gradually lifted, and sunlight began to spread softly. I knew that a new future awaited me,